Hey guys, I'm kind of scared. I'm worried about this heater grid bolt falling into my engine. I've been worried about it for a couple years, ever since I started seeing YouTube videos on it and seeing pictures of bolts that have jacked up the top of pistons and scratched the side of cylinder walls and damaged valves. And so we're going to do the delete plate for sure. And then I got to thinking about it, and a lot of people can do this and then just disable the grid heater solenoid, you know, take the power wire off. But we live in Colorado where it does get to minus 30 in the winter. It's rare that that happens, that it gets that low, but it gets below zero often. So minus 30, you know, which it does happen once or twice a winter. Not super cold like some places, but pretty cold. And so that's 60 something degrees below freezing, you know, that's cold. So I went ahead and bought this heater grid. Basically, this just relocates the heater grid, okay? So it moves it from on top of the engine where if something fails and a bolt melts off, it doesn't fall into the engine. So basically this, if you can imagine this on top of the engine, the intake manifold here, this goes on the downstream of the intake manifold. So if a bolt does melt off and this fails totally, the bolt will actually fall down inside the upstream intake rather than down into the engine, okay? So I was a little confused when I was reading the directions, but this is this makes sense now. So basically they just said hook the power wire, you know, you just take it off your grid heater and then you hook it right to one of these studs. And it just said one. And so I was looking at this, I was going, well, what's, you know, there's an insulator there, there's an insulator there, there's an insulator there. There's no insulator here, so this is where it ties the ground together. And we'll talk about the ground in a minute. But basically, it took me a minute to realize that it doesn't matter which one you tie it to because there's no insulator underneath these bolts right here. So this little plate right here ties these two together. So no matter which one you tie it to, it's going to power both of these grids. And there's two separate grids in here. There's one there and there's one on this side too. And you can see the two bolts right there. And so the power comes in here, heats this grid, the power comes in, crosses over, and then heats the other grid. And then they still stay crossed over until they get over here, and then they have a common ground here. And then the ground actually is the body. And so when you put your bolt through here into the intake manifold, okay, so it'll sit like this, going up into the intake manifold. That'll ground through the intake manifold. And then it comes to this other side where the intake manifold comes down and attaches right here. So whether you're using an aftermarket one or the factory one, the bolts that go through the intake manifold that go down through here into the engine block, that's your ground, okay? So I don't have an intake manifold right here to show you, but basically, if you pretend this was the intake manifold and it sits on top of here, they're saying this bolt, or any of these bolts, can be the ground. But basically you want to make sure you clean off the top of this right here to make sure that the ground is solid, because if the ground's not solid, this will be weak or not work at all. And so you want it to work well. So I'm probably going to do 2 or 3 of those. And the way I've kind of done this before is as far as removing paint off stuff like this that I don't want to gouge a lot of. But, you know, I don't want to use a flap disc because that's going to just, I'm not going to get it in there and it's just going to rip, you know, it's just going to grind stuff off crazy, just like a grinder wheel would. So instead I'm going to use this carbide burr. This is an old one I've had for years and years, and I'm still beating on it and it's still working. But basically I'm going to use it low RPM. Of course, this will cut metal like crazy, right? So I got to use this at real low RPM like this and just kind of touch the top of the paint or the the oxidation or the whatever's on top of there, just to make sure I get a good, nice, clean surface. And just kind of do that, make sure it's nice and tight. You can work this around like this and get all the way up in the edge like that. So these little carbide burrs are great. They're expensive, but they're great. And so I'll probably do 2 or 3 bolts just to make sure I get a good solid ground. And this might be something that, you know, periodically in your maintenance list that you do, because you do a maintenance list, right? Besides your regular maintenance of things to check on, because anytime you make these add-ons, there's things you want to check, right? So I might just break these loose once a year and then retorque them just to make sure the ground stays good and solid. Because there's no real way to know if it's not working well. The only tool I bought for this project is this, I don't know what this is called, but it's basically an offset extended crowfoot. Well, crow feet are offset, but this is an extended crowfoot, 19 millimeter, and this is for the fuel lines. Okay, so I'm going to kind of video this as I go and try not to kill you with all the little details of pulling all the bolts out, but there's 3 bolts here that hold this on. There's a bracket that stands up right here that this attaches to, so there's 3 bolts that hold on your dipstick. There's also a bolt back, this little, actually there's a tab right here that you just pop off. Right there, there's a stud that sticks up that this plastic piece attaches to. You just have to kind of pry that plastic piece up. That holds that wire on right there and get it off the top of the stud. And then when you get on the stud itself, it's kind of a long stud, it goes all the way down. It does unscrew and come out the top right there. So that's what holds the dipstick. Now you can kind of push the dipstick out of the way like this, And the next step was to disconnect the mass airflow sensor. There is a little bolt that holds a bracket right back here. There's a bracket right there. You loosen this up. This is actually 7/16. I tried all the metric stuff on it, of course, but this is SAE parts. Then there's this little piece right here we have to pull off the front right here. And that's just a stud. That little stud can stay in there. That's part of the intake manifold. Okay, and then we'll pull off these 5 bolts right here. And this bolt is going to be a little challenge to get to right here. We'll just have to pull this off right here. Okay, it's a little bit better. Okay, so there's actually 6 bolts that hold this down. We've got the 4 on the corners. There's one here in the middle, and then this long stud that goes through here that holds this bracket on is the 6th one. Okay, in this way, it's nice because if for some reason something happens and I can't get back to this project for 2 weeks or a couple days or a couple weeks or even a month or whatever, no big deal. This is, my bolts are labeled and I don't have to rely on my poor memory to remember where they go. Okay, now I think I have everything loose here. Let's see if we can get this out. Let's bring this up. And then we're just going to give this a twist, and hopefully this will be enough to get this loose here. Yep, there we go. There's the intake manifold, and it is sooty. Get kind of a close-up of the grid heater. And you know, these can really fill with soot terribly, and this one's not too bad. Next, we're going to take this bolt off. Now, this is the actual wire that goes to the heater grid, that powers the heater grid that comes from this solenoid. So that comes around like this, goes around here, goes over to that side of the engine. This is what we're going to attach to our new heater grid. And also, when they're talking about the jiggle bolt test, or the bolt jiggle test, you just kind of grab the back of this and jiggle it up and down. If that's loose or clunky, don't drive the truck. Get this thing out, because that means the bolt is starting to melt down, and the nut could fall off the end of the bolt, and the nut could fall off and end up in your engine. So this is what we're worried about right here, the back side of this on the inside. But as you can see, mine's nice and tight, but I'm just not good. I don't want to rely on doing the jiggle bolt test. Oh yeah, it feels like it's loosening up, let's get it changed. That to me, that's just risky. For this one, I hate all these brackets because they make them all different and you never know what to do with them. Well, I don't. It's not that smart, but basically we're gonna have to pry this one in like this. Okay, there we go. So see that little tab right there? That's what you're trying to push in to get it to disengage. There's also one way back there we'll have to get also. Same thing, that's must be kind of a pain to get to. And also this line right here is another one of these basically. And it's a little hard to see behind the wire, but I've basically already started off, and that's just going to pull off just like that as well. This has a little nipple right there. Okay, so we'll get both of those out of the way. Now we're just going to take note of this. On my truck, this corrugated has this corrugated wire loom around it. This one goes to the front. The one that doesn't have anything goes to the back. It looks like the length, this one wouldn't reach up there anyway, so maybe that's self-explanatory. All right, so next we have to get these 2 lines off right here. This one, this Banjo bolt looking thing right here. There we go. And then there's another fuel line right here. And this one goes down here. That one goes down lower. We've got to get those loose. And I think what we're going to do is just try to put a 17mm wrench right here on this. Let's see if we can break it loose. Well, that was easy. It's a 17mm ratcheter to get it off here. Once we start taking these apart, we're going to lay all these in perfect order. Negative battery posts on both batteries are taken off, so that if anybody does accidentally get in and turn the key on, it won't spray fuel everywhere. And yeah, Okay, good. That one's loose. Sometimes there's a washer in the middle here. I got to be careful. There might be a washer right there. Now, so we just loosened that banjo bolt. Now we're going to go back to this one and loosen this. Okay, that was on there a little firmer. Okay, keeping these super clean. I pressure washed the engine. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. I pressure washed the engine before I did this, and then made sure, all this whole area from way up here, washed all this, all up underneath there, all of this right here, and worked my way down. So I'm washing all the crap down, and then that way, if I'm knocking dirt off up here, off top of anything, hopefully it won't fall down inside. You know, you can vacuum out the inside of this right here once you get the plate out, but as far as the injector lines or any holes, no dirt, no moisture, no nothing. This has got to be super, super, you know, when your grandma said cleanliness is next to godliness, she was talking about working with diesel injection. All right, now that we've got that one loose and that one loose, we're going to go down here where this line comes down and comes to the back right here, and we'll loosen this one as well. Now the good part about this is when you loosen this one, it kind of tilts that out of the way like that, okay? Okay, now this is exactly why I bought this little rubber plug kit. So I do use these on different lines when I'm taking something apart that I want dripping everywhere or I want to protect. Just make sure if you're reusing them that it's nice and clean inside. And so I checked this one. This one's good. And so we're going to slide this over this one right here. And that's going to keep any junk from going inside there, especially if I have to come back to this project in a couple days. Now this one right here is just loose. This part right here is just loose, so it's not open to air or anything, so that'll be fine. All right, now we've got to get underneath here. And okay, so now this is the line that comes down underneath the heater grid, okay? The heater grid, the intake plenum, I guess is what it would be. So this is just kind of a little banjo bolt also, and this is a 17 millimeter, and you just have to barely crack it. This one was actually I barely moved the wrench. I mean, it didn't even really pop. It just kind of moved. So it wasn't even real snug to begin with. And then this rod then will rotate down like this. Problem is, as soon as this popped loose, the rod moved a little bit, and the banjo bolt washer from right here between the banjo bolt and the fuel rail fell to the ground. So that could end up anywhere down here in the engine compartment. You know, just make sure that you get that out before you loosen that lower bolt. Okay. Here's what the washer looks like. It's got a little rubber seal on the inside. So, okay, and that's just how I do the nuts. That's the hot wire nut, the upper banjo bolt washer on the fuel line. Just a little piece of wire, broken, stuck through there, holds them in place. We're gonna get after fuel line number 1 here with the 19 millimeter. Lefty loosey. Those aren't very tight. Okay. Yeah, these are tight though. Phooey. Once they're loose, they're loose. Okay, good. And there's fuel line number 1. So I'm setting these in here, basically in the direction that they go, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so this is just kind of funny. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 1, number 2. Number 3 on the rail is actually not number 3. This is number 3 back here. I'm not really showing it in the camera. So this isn't number 3 on the rail. This is number 3 back here. So just keep that in mind when you go to take these apart, that if you loosen what you think is number 3 here, it's not going to get this one off right here. It crossed them over a little bit. Okay, now when we're looking at this sensor here, where the tip of my screwdriver is touching. You got to get that off. Problem is, it has a clip, and the clip is facing the firewall. Okay, so here's what's so frustrating to me about doing jobs like this. I'm not scared of the big stuff. It's this stupid little stuff that makes me crazy. I spent, when I rear built my turbo, I spent like 20 minutes on one of these stupid connectors trying to figure it out. So this thing is facing the wrong direction. It's facing that way, okay? So thanks, Dodge. And also, you have to know how this works, because this little connector, you can't just squeeze this and pull it up right here. This little red thing right here has to slide out that way, okay? But in order for it to slide out that way, there's a little locking pin, and this little locking pin is right here. See that little thing sticking out right there? So you can't slide this way, you can't slide this tab that way until you slide this thing up, okay? So I had to reach around behind there with this 90-degree pick, and I love these little picks, I use them for all kinds of things, and slide it up, like literally reach around like this, get onto it, slide it up. Then I took this little pick and jabbed it in the back of this right here, and then started prying it and putting a lot of tension on it. And then I pulled this out, and then it popped out. Okay, then I was able to slide it up and off. So let me just show you the right direction. So if you can work on it from the front side, you can put your thing in here, slide this up, and then I've got a screwdriver there I'm going to twist, and it's going to start sliding it over. Now obviously my thing won't fit in there anymore, but hopefully it's pushed it up and gotten it over far enough that we can go ahead and get this over. And now it slides over. Okay, what a pain. Okay, I see why nobody films this on YouTube, because this is just a pain. It's a pain to do, and it's also a pain to film. But basically, once you get that connector off, you can get back to number 4 there and get the wrench on. And then you can just bypass the wrench by flipping it over. The wrench will slide right past this, just barely, because this thing up here is in the way as well. So, okay, so this long arm Pittsburgh 19mm is plenty long to get back there. These don't have a ton of torque on them, so they're pretty easy to break loose, but it's just so uncoordinated, and your range of motion is just so small that you have to take it off and spin it over and, you know, flip it over and flip it over and flip it over. So my torque, my breaker bar, my cheater bar that I made is another 19mm. This is just a 3/4 inch bolt and a 3/4 inch nut on the inside, regular nut, 2 washers, and then a 3/4 inch lock nut on the outside. So I'm going to use this as my torque adder. So this will be on the end, and I'll be able to pry with this, hopefully. Let's see how it works. Okay, so I'm trying to get back here to number 5. And I can get my wrench on it, but there's just not a lot of room to pry right here. So okay, and so I don't really have a 19mm stubby, which would be nice right now, because working back there, just flipping the wrench over, just trying to get it loose enough so you can get it off by your hand, takes a couple turns, 2 or 3 turns. And so actually I had this 3/4, and it's a little shorter than this one, and it seems to be helping. It's better, but it's still not like a stubby. If I had a 3/4 stubby, that'd be great. 3/4 seems to fit these fuel line nuts a little bit better than the 19mm. Okay, I've tried all my 3/4 inch wrenches, all my 19mm wrenches. I tried the Crowfoot special tool that I bought, the 19mm. I can't get anything on that because there's a bracket in the back that keeps me from getting a lot of the wrenches on. This engine lift bracket right here, I'm unbolting with a 15mm socket and a breaker bar. And once you break them loose, they turn pretty easily, so you can turn them out by hand, so you don't have to like get a ratchet on it. But I think if I get that out of the way, and then there's a little black harness connector back there as well, you'll see that thing. If you could get that out of the way, I just can't get my hand on it in any position, coming from the side, coming from the top, coming from the front. any way that I can get enough strength on it to break it loose, to pinch it, to pull it off. So I'm removing the engine bracket hoist right now, the hoisting bracket. Okay, removing the engine hoist bracket made a big difference. I was able to get the 3/4 inch wrench, the regular 3/4 inch wrench, on that number 6 fuel line that attaches to the engine. And I was able to break it loose and then flip it over and, you know, turn it. Took a little while, but it's pretty loose right now. Now I'm going to loosen up the fuel rail attachment to number 6 fuel line. And this little wrench extender's really paid off with the bolt that goes through right there. Make sure that's seated on there nicely, snug down there. Okay. Yep. And that should do it. Maybe one more turn with this. Okay, so now we got the number 6 fuel line out. Now we're going to pull the fuel rail. It looks like there's 5 bolts if I count them correctly. There's one here on the inboard side. There's another one in the back on the inboard side. And there's 3 in the front here. There's one right there you can see. There's one right there you can see. And this is more of a stud, it looks like. And then this was the stud that held the dipstick in right here. That's this little thing snapped on top of. Now for this one that has this little piece of plastic on it, I just put my 10mm on, shove that up, get it out of the way. Then you can put your box end on it. Okay, and here's the fuel rail, what it looks like. This is the outboard side, this is the inboard side, so there's the 4 tabs that hold it down. And this connector back here, the little female adapter that goes over this has the squeeze tab on the bottom. Okay, so it was easy just to kind of pull it out, kind of rotate it around to where I could see the squeeze tab, squeeze it, then push it down with my thumb, push it off. Okay, then flip it back over and pull it out. Okay, now that the fuel rail's out, there's 4 more bolts holding this plate on. All right, everything's loose. Let's see if it comes out. One other thing, 2 other things that I didn't mention along the way. I didn't loosen that back blue wire connector right there because it just, I don't know, it just wasn't in the way. So, and then also this Banjo bolt connection right here, I just slipped a baggie over it just to protect dirt from falling in it or getting down it. All right, so I'll go ahead and get this gasket cleaned off here and probably try to scrape out as much of that soot in there that I can. But first, let's go look at the grid heater plate. All right, so, you know, not super clogged, not a ton of soot in there. The bolt actually looks okay. It doesn't look like it was getting hot, so the solenoid still seems to be still working. Doesn't seem to be causing any problems there. The bracket there is nice and tight. I can't wiggle it, so it hasn't loosened up any, and that's good. But man, to put a nut, even to put a stud inside here, or to put a nut that can loosen and fall into the engine, just kind of boggles my mind that this even happened in the engineering. Okay, anyway, here we are. All right, so we're going to get this off. This is a 1 inch. That thing's going in the trash, never to be installed again. Okay, that's the intake air temperature sensor we just reinstalled. This kit comes with an O-ring that you can use, but they say you can reuse the crush washer. I just reused the crush washer. Ugh.